So he didn't know how to do it. He had to do the punishment, but eventually they taught him how. The answer was just to take a picture of himself and put it inside the bottle. So that was creativity. Another time he was standing at guard duty and a pickup truck drove up with some guys in the back, and they asked him directions. And when he was talking to the driver, the guy in the back threw a bucket of urine at him, and the driver just sped off. And he didn't shoot, he said, because the criminals, they know this. He says he's not allowed to shoot when they're fleeing. So anyway, that was that. Um, Another time, let's see, he was the leader. All right, but first I'll tell you what happened. So his sister owned a club, and he fell in love with a girl that was, I think, 17. That was a stripper at the club, and so and she also used drugs. And so he spoke to the one of the condo, one of the millionaires. He was in Spanish un fiscal, which means somehow a lawyer and some kind of authority. And the lawyer just told him, minimize all the risks. If you cannot cut the relationship, minimize all the risks. And of course, everything was hypothetical. He said, what if I fell in love with a girl that was only 17? What would happen? You would go to jail because you're at this age 22 or something. And so anyway, back at the club, on Mondays, he says that here I am working at a valet at what, 550 or whatever amount of money per hour. And then he says, and in the club on Mondays, he would take his gun and he would go with his brother-in-law to deposit $5,000 to the bank in cash. And he says it was just amazing. He said the security cameras were way better than the ones we had in the $1 million condo, which we're not recording, by the way. And another thing he mentioned to me was one time he was in shock that he came to work with cross, like X stitches from his nose all the way down to his chin, around his lip, and even his lip had been had stitches. And then he spoke without opening his lips. He said, "You know what happened to me, right?" And I said, "No, what happened?" And he said, and then somebody else walked by, one of the people that owned a condo there, and he says, "Oh, I was at a gas station. I wasn't fighting. This guy just hit me with a beer bottle." And then finally he said, "Oh, I had to tell you the truth, Daniel. I was at the club. These men were making trouble, and the bouncers that we had were afraid of them. So I walked up to them and I told them to go outside. And so they pushed me, punched me, etc. But then they ran out the door, and I was chasing them. But before I could, before I closed the door on them, I was pushing them out. I had grabbed them and so. But what happened was one of them hit me with a beer bottle on the face. But he said, but I did what I wanted to do. I locked the door, and they were outside. And then They took me to the hospital because he was bleeding all over the place. And they said there was a beautiful nurse there. And then they sewed him up. And the hospital was across the street from the club. Well, there was an expressway in between them. So he said I could have just walked across the expressway. He was joking. Um, and he said that he had to push the glass with his tongue. That took him a while to get all of that out of there. But he said, I completed my mission, which is what he was trained to do in the military. His mission was to close the door and get those guys out of the club. However, the old man that he told the truth to was also an ex-military. And Mr. Garcia said to him, wait a minute, did you ever do anything similar in Venezuela when you were in the army? He said, yes. Okay, first, were you wearing a gun? Yes. Did people ever obey you? Oh, all the time they obeyed me. He said, were you wearing a gun? Yes. Were you wearing a uniform? Yes. Were you alone? No, there were four of us. Uh-huh. What about, were the lights on? He said, in Venezuela they were on. At the club over here in Hialeah they were off. Oh. And then he said, what about, let's see, what else was there? Were you drinking? In Venezuela, never on duty. And over here, yes, I had been drinking. So he said, that's what happens. So you weren't wearing a gun, you weren't wearing a uniform, you were not, you had been drinking, and you were alone. And then my coworker said, me desnudó, or he opened my eyes and I was naked. I saw all of my mistakes. So that's what happens. That's what happens. I remember just one soldier when I was 16 in Honduras. There was going to be a dance competition, but it was crowded. So this one soldier went to the center of the room, pulled out his knife, showed it up in the air. He turned on the lights also. He waved it around with his hand, and then he began to point it at people and to move back. He didn't talk, and he walked around the room until finally it was big enough to have the dance competition. This must be shocking for somebody from the United States. Soldiers with machine guns, mall security with rifles, on bicycle. It's a different world over there. And what else? Oh, that's the story about the Valet guy. Oh, okay, one more time. Finally, he went dancing. He met a girl that was half Oriental, but plumpy. And she kept asking him how old he was. And he just kept saying, I'm old enough. Because she was obviously older than him. And then he would respond with things that are very macho. He would say, I am a man. And then she would ask him things like, what time do you have to go home? Is your mother waiting up for you? And he would respond with, your place or mine. Now he didn't have a car. He couldn't take it to his mother's house where he lived, and so he was just praying to God that she would say her place. I don't remember which was the actual result, except that he said he spent his whole paycheck on her, but a good portion was just for the taxi. But he must have not had any responsibilities. I didn't have kids yet either, but I'm talking about bills. He didn't have a cell phone. His only responsibility was his flying lessons.